Hello and welcome to Across the Channel, the podcast that tries to answer French football's trickiest questions. For example, can France win without Kylian Mbappé? Not in Iceland, they couldn't. Is Michael Olise really the creative spark that Les Bleus need? And just who exactly is the new Monaco manager, Sebastian Pocognoli? We'll attack those topics and a little bit more too in episode 9 of Across the Channel. Just the one guest with me this morning, but what a guest he is. Indeed, not since Maurice Johnston's days at Nantes has Ligue 1 possessed such a formidable Scottish presence. Welcome on board, commentator and French football guru Andy Scott.
Hi Matt, you're forgetting about John Collins, who I know is a good friend of yours, so I'm surprised about that.
I didn't forget, I just thought that your presence is more formidable than John Collins. It's not quite up there with Mo Johnston, but good to have you on board, Andy. I know you've been across the France games in the last week or so. Before we get stuck into that, a quick reminder that we're counting on you, the dear listeners, to help make this podcast a success. We really do need you to rate, review, and comment on the pod. So please just take a little moment when you can to do that on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you may use. Today's pod is going to be split into two distinct halves. We're going to start by discussing those recent France matches, then turn our attentions back to Ligue 1 to reflect on the first 7 rounds of the season, which have produced a good number of storylines already. So France 3, Azerbaijan 0 last Friday. Iceland 2, France 2 on Monday evening. That means Les Bleus aren't yet qualified for the World Cup. They need to beat Ukraine at home in their next game on the 13th of November or face a nervy trip to Azerbaijan 3 days later in order to book their ticket. Now, Didier Deschamps, after the 2-2 draw in Reykjavik, said we've taken 4 points from 6. Of course, if we could win all of our games, we would. We had a lot of players missing, but those who came in tonight did the job. Andy, do you agree with Monsieur Deschamps? Did the guys who came in do the job?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you look at it, they've played 4 games and they've got 10 points, and ultimately they played their 2 hardest away games in that time. And it is reasonable to say that to get 4 points out of a possible 6 from your 2 toughest away games is perfectly acceptable. They would have liked to have wrapped up qualification for the World Cup before the games in November, I think, in order to rotate the squad, rest some key players, because injuries are a problem for them, and obviously the top players now are playing a lot of games, and that needs to be managed. However, they're in a perfectly good position going into these last 2 games to secure qualification. It would be an enormous surprise if they slipped up now and failed to finish first. So in terms of the results and the situation in the group, I think they're perfectly fine. Obviously, there are issues maybe with the way they're playing. I mean, I was at the Iceland game last month, and I thought that the performance was far from perfect. I think it was much more simple at home to Azerbaijan on Friday because the gulf between the 2 teams is so enormous. But in Iceland yesterday evening, again, you have to say that defensively it was not all that encouraging. They were playing with their strongest back line, to be honest. I mean, maybe a question mark about the left back because Lucas Digne seems to be a step ahead of Théo Hernandez in the fight for the left back slot, but that's not completely nailed down. Otherwise, it was Maignan in goal, it was Koundé at right back, it was Saliba and Upamecano in central defence. That's really France's strongest defence. So disappointing they conceded goals in that way, but the issue, of course, for them is the injuries in attack. And that's what's left them having to bring in the likes of Mateta and Thauvin. Not bad players to bring in, but France are missing, their biggest stars up front. And it's not going to be easy for any team to replace their top forwards.
Yeah, let's start with the attack, shall we, Andy? Because it was interesting. We saw two very different kinds of matches, as you say. We had Mbappé and Hugo Ekitike starting up front in what was a 4-4-2. Ekitike dropping out to the left quite a lot in that game against Azerbaijan. Michael Olise starting on the right, Kingsley Coman on the left. I get what you're saying, and it's a very measured sort of view to say, look, they got 10 points out of 12. Maybe we expect too much We expect them to go out and brush these sides, aside with no difficulty. I was watching the game against Azerbaijan, and I was thinking, it's not easy for these players who, with their clubs, they're playing twice a week. They're coming up invariably against low blocks because most of them play for Bayern Munich, for Arsenal, for Real Madrid, for big teams. And Azerbaijan were basically 11 men behind the ball. They're like, come on then, break us down. And it was difficult for them, but they had Kylian Mbappé, and Mbappé obviously made the difference. He got the goal, breaking the deadlock before half time. So Andy, that Mbappé goal obviously opened things up a little bit in the second half. But watching the game, I feel that France, and this is going to be the case, they do miss Antoine Griezmann. They do miss the presence of somebody who can come deep and just like orchestrate things and, pull the strings, if you like. We all hailed Michael Elise in the last international break. He was outstanding. But he's not quite that sort of player, is he? He plays higher up. He's kind of part of the forward line. And he's not, he's not a Platini. He's not a Griezmann, Zidane sort of player.
No, I mean, it's maybe a bit unfair to try and compare anybody with Griezmann. When you think back to the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, I know you were there, as was I, and I have to say that Griezmann's performances at that World Cup were up there with the greatest performances I've seen from any player in modern times at World Cup. He was that good. Honestly, he was that good. And it's very hard for anybody to come in and replace him in that France team. He was Deschamps' favourite player, really. They're not going to be the same without him. Of course, the thing is that we are building up to the World Cup. France are going to qualify. All that really matters is how they perform when the World Cup comes around. And at the moment, it's about making sure they get there and making sure their top players are fit when the World Cup comes around. And really, that means that if they miss these games now, it's probably not a bad thing, because otherwise the risk is that they're going to be completely rinsed, possibly even unavailable when the World Cup itself comes around. So right now, they're having to do the job without... who are their best players? Mbappé, I thought, was fantastic on Friday against Azerbaijan. His goal was one of the best Mbappé goals I've seen in a long time. Obviously, the asterisk being they were playing against limited opposition. But you're without Mbappé, your captain, your talisman. You're without the Ballon d'Or winner in Dembele, and you're without other attacking players who you mentioned. It's never going to be straightforward in that respect. And of course, they're also playing against opponents. Well, nobody's going to really give you plaudits for beating Azerbaijan. Iceland away is a very awkward game.
Andy, I'm going to go into Iceland. I want you to tell me your first choice front line now, because I've just sort of jotted it down, as Didier Deschamps probably has done already. But I'm assuming it's Mbappé through the middle. I'm assuming that Dembele and Doué probably play on the flanks. Maybe Olise behind. Desiree Doué is certainly not a shoo-in, but I'm thinking if everybody's fit and playing well, they're the four I would like to see. Probably with Tchouaméni and Manu Kone as holding midfielders. What would you think as the front line?
Well, if it looks like it's going to be a 4-2-3-1 and he wants to persist with Olise behind Mbappé and then, of course, Dembele on the flank, and then it's possibly... I think it could be Barcola. I think, Barcola or Doué. Marcus Thuram is a player who Deschamps obviously likes. Deschamps admitted during the last international break that Thuram wasn't scoring enough goals. He's only got 2 for his country in quite a lot of caps now, 30-something caps. I could be wrong. One of those goals was against Gibraltar nearly 2 years ago, and I don't think he's scored since. So questions about him. But for all the strength and depth that France have, I think that's what you're looking at as the likely, Dembele, Mbappé and Olise, and then maybe Doué, maybe Barcola. It's hard to see beyond them. And then, in the midfield, let's not forget that Tchouaméni has been unavailable in this international window. I think they really need him in the centre of midfield, and the feeling seems to be that Manu Kone is becoming a first pick in there. So it looks fairly well settled.
They've got talent in the middle, because Camavinga, didn't really sort of enhance his chances with his performance against Iceland, but then nobody played that well, and he's coming back from injury as well. Adrien Rabiot did pretty well, certainly in that game against Azerbaijan. There was a feeling last month, and I do think Tchouaméni and Manu Kone is a good partnership. And the more I watch, the more I think Manu Kone is really important, because sometimes when I watch this France side, or when I've watched them in recent years, I feel like they've got excellent midfielders, but they're just a little bit too kind of, I don't know if nonchalant is the word, but a bit laid back. They're all like technically brilliant, Tchouaménis and Rabiot and Camavinga, and they glide across the ground. They're top level players. What I like though about Kone, he's just got that kind of alertness, that energy. He covers the ground, but you would never accuse him of being too laid back on a football pitch. And I think that's really important for France, just to have that sort of terrier-like presence in the midfield. So for me, Tchouaméni and Kone would be the guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the moment on current form, and again, of course, things can change in the next 6-7 months. But yeah, Kone has certainly seized the chance that's come to him. I think Rabiot is one of the favourite players of Didier Deschamps. Will certainly have a role to play, and I think it's just a case of bringing the two together. I think at the World Cup in 2022, France were very impressive. I mentioned Griezmann, the role played by Giroud in that tournament, at least up to the final. And obviously Mbappe, when it came to the crunch, was so important. We kind of remember the attacking players from that tournament. From the Euros last year, I think we remember the defence. I mean, they were really struggling to score goals. Defensively, they were so solid. And it's a case of trying to marry the two together, having that attacking threat as well as being defensively solid, which they were not against Iceland. But, you know, in Saliba, I mean, you know, I'm sure you will agree with this, but Saliba for me is up there in the sort of top 3 or 4 centre-backs in the world.
I think so. I'm not sure Didier Deschamps, I mean, he did have a very strong Euros, but I think Deschamps always kind of seen Upamecano, I mean, just through merit really, as his sort of shoe-in, if you like. And then it's one between Konate and Saliba. Now, yeah, for me, it has to be Saliba, particularly, you know, Konate's form has dipped at Liverpool, his future's uncertain, but certainly two between those three. We'll talk about the defence, but the focus, first of all, we're looking at the attack, and against Iceland, it was really different. So it was an opportunity for players. Wonderful to see Thauvin coming on and scoring against Azerbaijan 6 years on since his last appearance and his last goal. Thauvin got a start on the right. Christopher Nkunku, another sort of forgotten man, played on the left. Jean-Philippe Mateta, who I think really deserved that call-up, playing up front, and Olise in the sort of free role, the number 10 role. Now, Mateta had trouble getting into the game, didn't he, against Iceland? They weren't necessarily playing to his strengths, didn't see much of the ball, miscontrolled a few times. And Nkunku, I would say, as well, until his goal was probably struggling a little bit. Thauvin, I think, will be a bit disappointed he didn't contribute more. So overall, it was a bad performance, wasn't it, from France? And yes, they were 1 down at half-time. Deschamps unhappy because it was a set piece and he feels there was a foul on Camavinga that VAR could have intervened on. But France, I think, got a bit lucky in that first game against Iceland with the goal Iceland had chalked off, which would have made it 2-2 right at the end. So I don't think Deschamps can complain. But overall, going back to the very first thing I said with Deschamps saying the guys who came in did a job, did they? I mean, Mateta got his goal, to be fair, in the second half. Brilliant play from Akliouche, who I'm a big fan of, just came on and set up that goal. But I don't think the others, Nkunku, of course, as well, a nice finish for his goal. But have they enhanced their chances of getting in the squad?
I think that's... I mean, Nkunku has had so many injury problems and just hasn't really managed to establish himself fully since leaving Leipzig for Chelsea, you know, what's that, 3 years ago now. And I'm not convinced he's going to be able to remain in the squad if everybody is fit. I think Mateta deserved the call-up. I think it was a good opportunity to give him that call-up because of the injury problems. The thing is, he's such a different profile to Mbappe that the team are going to maybe struggle to work out how to play to his strengths when they're used to having Mbappe lead the line. Of course, he's more of a kind of typical traditional centre-forward, and he got his goal with the back post finish from an Akliouche cross. But again, I find it very hard to imagine that he is going to be in the squad come the World Cup, and I think the same can be said of Florian Thauvin. I mean, Thauvin is now in his early 30s. He's not the kind of profile of player you would expect to be coming into the squad now. He has real quality, but if everybody's fit, I think it's really hard to see Thauvin and Mateta being in there.
Totally. If we're being brutally honest, these are guys who probably won't be at the World Cup, certainly for a lot of them. We've got so many players out missing. We've mentioned some of them already, but, you know, Mbappe injured, Barcola, Dembele, Desiré Doué, Ryan Cherki, Marcus Thuram. So, you know, that goes back to what I was saying. Maybe we shouldn't expect too much. Maybe we shouldn't be too critical. They did avoid defeat, but Andy, they came back quite well in the second half. They had a good sort of 20 minutes or so when Nkunku and Mateta got the goals. But is it too harsh to say sort of unforgivable to concede in the way they did to make it 2-2, or is it just one of those things?
Yeah, it was a really poor goal that they conceded because it was practically straight from the kickoff, having gone 2-1 up, and their defence was all at sea. I mean, the Iceland player Christian Lundsson, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he was suddenly completely free to run in on goal. So yeah, a bad goal to concede, and Deschamps was complaining that Iceland scored basically from their 2 attempts on target in the game. Yeah, but once again, I just think that you that's the kind of game you go into, you get the job done. You come away and you say, right. I mean, in the end, had they won, it wouldn't have been enough to qualify anyway because Ukraine won their game. So they've got the point. They move on to the next match. And I'd just like to say that as well. Actually, one player who we've forgotten to mention, I think we should bear in mind, is Rondal Kolomoani because he is a favourite player of Deschamps. He's had fitness problems. He's not really been in the Tottenham Hotspur team, but I think if he starts playing regularly, even if he's not scoring lots of goals, I think if he's playing regularly for Tottenham, contributing in the Premier League, I imagine that he will move further up the queue in front of the likes of Mateta pretty quickly. And so he's one to look out for as well.
Yep. Good shout. Yeah, it was a strange one, wasn't it? The Iceland equaliser. I think it was a concentration issue, and probably they subconsciously relaxed a bit, thinking, okay, we've done it. We've come from 1 down. We're 2-1 up. But it was strange as well. They were so high up the pitch. Saliba was definitely guilty of sort of following his man. He followed him from the sort of right centre-back position to some position on the left wing. If you're going to do that, okay, but then the midfielder has to drop in. Jules Koundé has to come across. Koundé was switched off as well. So I think it was like a combination of errors. And ultimately, yes, you wouldn't expect players of that caliber to switch off in a major tournament. So I think we can just say, okay, it happened. Let's move on, and we'll see if France can get the job done in that game against Ukraine. We know there have been some nervy sort of finales to qualifying campaigns. I'm not quite old enough to remember the Bulgaria and Israel defeats in the early 90s when Gérard Houllier went berserk with David Ginola for not taking the ball into the corner. But look, I don't think we're going to have a repeat sort of scenario there. Now, it's half time. The whistle has blown. I'm pleased to say that Andy Scott has turned in a far better first half performance than Les Bleus managed against both Azerbaijan and Iceland. He's earned himself a breather, and it's time for the quiz. So, last week, in case you missed it, I asked you a question about Lyon. So it was after Malik Fofana had scored goal number 1,000 in the history of the Groupama Stadium. I asked you to name me the first ever goal scorer in that stadium and the player who scored goal number 250 and the player who scored the 500th goal. Well done to a few of you who emailed in. Philippe Bargiel and Pierre Carpentier. Both of you wrote in to say Alexander Lacazette was the Groupama Stadium's first goal scorer. Correct. And a special mention to George Rodriguez, who got Lacazette and who also got Ryan Shirky, scorer of goal number 500. I'm kind of quite proud and pleased with myself that nobody got the right answer for the 250th goal scorer. We had suggestions, Memphis Depay and Nabil Fekir. They were both wrong. The correct answer, Andy, last chance for you.
Somebody unexpected, somebody that you would never imagine.
He was a striker.
Mariano Diaz.
Oh! Wow, I wasn't expecting you to get that. I'd totally forgotten about Mariano Diaz, but Andy doesn't forget these things. So, yeah, nobody got that, but there were certainly points picked up, a couple of them for George Rodriguez, and that means on the leaderboard we've got 2 listeners who lead the way with 2 points, Pierre Carpentier and George Rodriguez. So well done, guys. Still early days, and it is time for this week's question. So if you think you know the answer, you can email in ligue1podcast@gmail.com. So, Lens winger Florian Thauvin scored against Azerbaijan last Friday. Who was the last player to score for Les Bleus whilst on the books of Lens? I'm going to give you a choice here, because I do think it's tough. Was it A, Jonathan Close? Was it B, Frederic Dehout? Was it C, Philippe Vercruz? Or was it D, Tony Varel? If you think you know the answer, please do email in ligue1podcast@gmail.com. Andy, do you know the answer? Just out of curiosity.
I don't know the answer, but I have an idea. I know who I would go for as a guess.
Okay. Well, likewise, listener, if you think, you've got a hunch, give it a go. There won't be any minus points. So, you've got a chance of scoring. Now, the second half of Across the Channel is going to be dedicated to Ligue 1. The action is getting back underway this weekend. It's been a really, really fascinating first couple of months to the season. And as any of you parents out there will know, it is half-term coming up. So Andy and I are preparing our half-term school report. We're going to be looking at who is top of the class right now, who could do better, and who is going straight into detention as soon as this podcast is over. Just a little bit of background. Paris Saint-Germain, they lead the way. They've got 16 points from 7 games. Marseille, Strasbourg and Lyon have got 15. And then we have Monaco in 5th with 13. Lens also with 13 points. Pocognoli and Ansu Fati, 2 newcomers to Ligue 1. They're joint top of the scoring charts at the moment with 5 Ligue 1 goals. Andy, I'm going to throw it to you. With the first question, who is your star pupil? Who is top of the class? Now, this can be a player. I encouraged you, though, to choose a coach or a team in this category.
Well, I think that Paris Saint-Germain are top of the league, obviously, but that would be too obvious. I mean, the two teams who have caught my eye, and I can't really decide which one deserves more plaudits, but for very different reasons. One is Strasbourg, who I think have been... they've been exceptional. I think we kind of expected them to have a good start to the season. We knew they spent a lot of money. We knew that Liam Rosenior was a good coach. But I've been very impressed by what I've seen from them. Even when they lost against Marseille, I thought they played some really daring, exciting football. It's kind of between them and Olympique Lyonnais, because Lyon were kind of the opposite. They had a terrible summer, as we all know. We expected them to struggle immediately, and they've exceeded all our expectations. I mean, I'm saying this despite the fact they were recently beaten, of course, at home by Toulouse, losing 2-1, having been a goal up going into the latter stages. But they've had a fine start to the season. They've given themselves a platform on which to build, despite having a very light squad. So I think probably I would say Paulo Fonseca deserves huge credit, because let's not forget he has been banned from the touchline, even from the dressing room, for the last 6 months or so, if you include the summer, which doesn't count, I suppose. But, going back to that confrontation with the referee at the beginning of March, he's not been able to get anywhere near his team on match days. And he's clearly done a lot of really impressive work on the training ground in pre-season to get his ideas across, which he couldn't really do, having been appointed midway through last season to replace Pierre Sage. He has got his Lyon team playing the way he wants them to play. The goal they scored against Toulouse, even though they lost that game, I think maybe remembered as the goal of the season for the build-up. If anybody's not seen it, check it out. I think it's Malik Fofana's finish, right? But it's a stunning move down the right-hand side, and then the ball in for Fofana to score. And, he's got them defending very well. They're not conceding goals. I think that they are limited. I've said recently on the podcast that eventually their difficulties in terms of lack of depth in the squad because of their financial issues will catch up with them. But the way they've started the season has been incredibly impressive.
Andy, which player, if you had to pick one, would you give an A+ to?
Well, the one that sticks in my mind is Valentin Barco at Strasbourg, which again is. I mean, obviously there are plenty of players who've had an impressive start to the season, but he is just an all-action midfielder who seems to be the perfect fit for that fluid Strasbourg system, changing positions. He covers so much ground. If you're a Strasbourg fan, you're going to love him. And he is my guy, Valentin Barco, the Argentinian at Strasbourg, the red-haired Argentinian.
So I really like that shout. I did actually mean which Lyon player, but it's
sorry,
fine.
sorry.
No, but that's cool. That's cool to give Barco a shout out.
Can I say
in that Lyon side?
Well, Tyler Morton's obviously caught my eye. I mean, the young Scouser who's come in and wasn't playing, of course, wasn't really anywhere near the Liverpool team, but has looked like he's taken to Ligue 1 with such ease, quite graceful, deep line playmaker, popped up with a headed goal in the win against Lille, and looks a perfect fit. And good scouting from Lyon, I think, to have pinpointed him as a guy who can make a difference for them in that side, and he's settled in brilliantly. So yeah, Tyler Morton.
Definitely. He's been really, really good alongside Tanner Tessman as well in midfield on Tolisso. I think Tolisso deserves some love as well. The Lyon fans are really enjoying his performances. Yeah, good shout. So I'm gonna just have a little say about Lens. I'd like to put Lens forward because I think Pierre Sage has done really well. I think he's just come in. He's got sort of new players to have to bed in. He's got quite a young side. I think Lens have had a hard fixture list as well. So to be just 3 points off the top in sixth position, I think that's great going. I think they can build on that. But my star pupil, if you like, I don't know if like the listeners are maybe expecting this, because I do like to talk about Marseille. But I think, when you look at the first month of the season, they were absolutely the naughty boys, weren't they? They were getting in fights in the playground. They were throwing their toys out of prams, if you do that at school, which I guess you don't. But their turnaround.
Unless you're a very precocious baby, you're not in a school.
No, they've been, they've been talking in class. Lots of bad things. And what a turnaround. What a turnaround. And you're looking at it now. They're on this fantastic run of victories. They're a point behind PSG. They've, of course, finished that horrible run of not beating PSG at home. And I think the fact they've beaten PSG in itself gives them a huge amount of belief. B deserves credit for, I think, keeping a lid on things, like in terms of the way the club looked like it was imploding sort of towards the end of August. I think Rabiot and Jonathan Rowe, they were not unpopular players. I think that people would have been, in the dressing room concerned about that. Particularly Adrien Rabiot, who was seen as this kind of symbol of Marseille's ambition, signing a current French international. So the fact that they've moved on from that and have sort of hit their stride, I think it's impressive. And the last game against Metz was interesting because so many changes. Started the teenager Robinho Vaz in attack, and I think Marseille now they've got 20, 24 players, and De Zerbi can rotate. He'll have to, because they've got the Champions League to negotiate as well. But I think in past years, seems like Marseille were unable to rotate and win in Ligue 1. And I think the fact they can do that, it was against a weak Metz side, but I think there are a few teams now that Marseille, even maybe Lyon, obviously Paris Saint-Germain, but these teams can maybe leave one or two players out for the Champions League and just try to keep things fresh and keep things ticking on in Ligue 1. You're nodding, so you'll go along with that.
Yeah, completely. I think we've seen now, and we've discussed this separately, haven't we? That there's a growing gulf between the sort of haves and have-nots in Ligue 1. Obviously, Marseille are one of a handful of clubs, along with PSG, Strasbourg, maybe one or two others, who have strong squads, depth, quality. Marseille particularly have depth, and then there are a number of teams down at the bottom whose budgets have been drastically reduced because of the media landscape in France. The fact there's been no TV deal to speak of. Suddenly, their biggest bulk of guaranteed income has gone, and what money there is available now to clubs from broadcasting is also being, in many respects, funneled towards the clubs who've been involved in Europe, and that creates a bigger gap. And it means teams like Angers, Brest to an extent, despite the fact they were in the Champions League last year, Metz, who you mentioned, one or two others,
Lorient,
are really, really now the gulf is growing between them and the clubs at the top. And so, it gives an opportunity for Marseille when you go into these games to rotate and still win comfortably.
Yeah, I think it's a chat that probably deserves some airtime another day, not today, but there is a divide. And one of the things I loved about Ligue 1 was that Marseille or Lyon or even PSG, sort of going back a few years, they could get turned over in Metz, they could get turned over in Montpellier. You had these hostile atmospheres, and you had teams that were absolutely able to compete with the best, on their day. And it's less the case now because of what you said, that financial gap that has built up. The positive spin-off is that the bigger teams do have bigger squads. The bigger teams are able to string wins together, and perhaps it will help Marseille, Monaco, Lyon compete with Paris Saint-Germain in the years to come. Andy, let's go on for now, though, with your pupil who's doing okay but needs to try a bit harder, could do better, has the potential to do even better.
Is this an individual or can it be a collective?
No, I'm looking more collective here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say Monaco, because I think as a team, I think they've been, and this perhaps is a segue into a separate discussion, but I think as a team I've been very underwhelmed by them, because I expected them to be better at the beginning of this season, to maybe kick on from Last season, when they finished third, they pushed Marseille for second place. It looked in the first half of last season like they might be the most credible challengers to PSG. I think they've looked a bit disjointed, bad defensively, and they look like a team that has been weakened in the close season, selling one or two important players, perhaps not suitably replacing them. But, there's been a change on the bench, and that might change a lot of things there.
Yeah, I find it an interesting change as well, Andy. I have to say, I don't know a huge amount about Sebastian Pocognoli. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Young Belgian coach, used to play for the Red Devils, played a handful of times at left back for Belgium, and has obviously had a fantastic start to his managerial career. What is he, 38 years of age? He's taken Union Saint-Gilloise to the league title last season. They're in the Champions League this year. Andy, he's, I think, one of the main sort of attributes that he has, one of the reasons they've gone for him is because he's good at developing young talent, and Monaco have always produced young talent. Is he a good choice, do you think?
Well, I don't want to say he's not a good choice. Obviously, I mean, I don't know enough about the guy's history because I don't follow Belgian football too closely. But I think that there are, and these are not warning signs, they're not like red lights flashing, but there are obviously some question marks. One is that Monaco, in the recent past, appointed Philippe Clement, who'd done very well in Belgium with Club Brugge and Genk, won league titles there, came to Monaco, had a reasonably promising start, but in the end, things ended pretty badly for him at Monaco. And the other thing is that Pocognoli is coming out of an environment where I think often you have to look at the club where he's come from. You have to say, how responsible is the coach for that team's success? Now, Union Saint-Gilloise, I think, is a fascinating story because they are historically a very famous club in Belgium, but who last year won their first league title in 90 years. They're a small club. They're not one of the traditional big teams in Belgium. The reason that they have enjoyed so much success in recent years is partly because of the investment by Tony Bloom, the guy who, of course, is so responsible for what Brighton have done in England and turning them into a force in the Premier League. Tony Bloom has invested there, and he has his company's methods of signing players, the data, the way they look at the data to attract players has brought them success. It's worked at Brighton. It's helped Union Saint-Gilloise bring through players, sell them on at a profit. There are lots of examples of that. Victor Boniface, for example, who went on to Bayer Leverkusen. If you look last summer, they sold a couple of players, one to Benfica, Franjo Ivanovic, another one has gone to Sunderland, Sadiki, I believe. So, the point I'm trying to make is that he is working in an environment which is set up to succeed. And he is not the only coach who has done well at Union Saint-Gilloise in recent times, even if he is the one who won the league title. Now, I think it's just that the question is, can he come into this environment in Monaco, which is going to be very different, and enjoy anything like the same degree of success? And that is a question that needs to be asked, and we'll see the answer in the coming months.
Yeah, with regards just to Tony Bloom, it's a very good point, and what he's done at Brighton is incredible, and the recruitment's been incredible. But they've had good managers as well. Obviously, De Zerbi before, Herzler, another very young profile who seems to be very gifted young coach. So I think there's reason maybe as well to be optimistic. Like we don't quite know what we're going to get, but I'm always encouraged when Ligue 1 clubs like think out of the window a little bit, think out of the box. Is that the expression? Think out of the box. Look out the window. Well, they can do that as well. But,
you can think out of the window. You can open the window and think.
No, because for too long we were kind of like recycling the same coaches. And
are you saying it should have been Frederic Antonetti who got the job, or Antoine Kombari?
Could have come back, but no, those days, thankfully, with all due respect to those coaches, some of whom were very good, are over, and we're seeing much more interesting and attacking football. And I think, I absolutely want to give him the benefit of the doubt. I think it's an interesting appointment.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very interesting appointment. I'm just saying that it's hard for me to be completely convinced straight away that this is somehow going to work. And I also think that Monaco are a team who a lot of work needs to be done with that squad. And I think they've been weak in defence. I think they've looked pretty weak defensively. But of course, they're missing players in midfield. That's an issue. But if they can get Paul Pogba fit and in the team, and if they can, they've got goals in that team. Ansu Fati's had a promising start. There is real quality up front. So there's lots of potential. There's no question there's lots of potential. And Pocognoli is clearly a coach with lots of potential.
Thank you, Andy. We forgot to mention Paul Pogba as a World Cup midfielder. We're not quite in that discussion yet, but let's hope he gets back. He's not going to be playing at the weekend. He's had a slight setback, but hopefully Pogba will be back in action pretty soon. Who could do better? Who needs to try a bit harder? I'm going to go for Rennes and for Habib Beye. I think they've got to be doing better. They won their first game of the season against Marseille with just 10 men on the pitch. That was a remarkable win. Since then, it's 1 victory in 6. They lost 4-0 at Lorient. They've drawn 4 matches out of their last 5. And, the quality is there in the squad. And Habib Beye, unfortunately for him, if he doesn't turn things around, I think probably in the next month, I think he's going to be fearing for his job. He's been told he has to get them in Europe this season. And I think if you look at the wage bill, look at the squad, the quality of players, they should be pushing for Europe. They should probably be in the top 6, would you say, Andy? Would you go with that?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Would definitely agree with that. And I covered their last game against Le Havre when they they imploded, I suppose is the way to put it. They looked really in control, 2-0 up, and ended up drawing 2-2. But I think that there is promise. I think that Esteban Lepol and Brelin Bolo is a strike partnership which could really produce some goals for them. But Habib Beye has to get it right. It's as simple as that. With the amount of investment that Rennes have made, they need to be pushing for a Europa League place, I would say. And I think if they fall short of that, then he might not survive.
Okay, Andy, put your serious face on now. Who is going into detention? Whose behaviour has just been unacceptable for you in these first 2 months? This can even be an individual. It can be a player.
Well, I think that you have to look maybe down the table, and I think that, again, I tend to focus on the performances of clubs, and I want to see teams scoring goals and entertaining me, and I think that Metz are bad. So I'm going to go for them as the worst team in the league, and I think that it must be so frustrating being a Metz supporter because they keep coming up, and their fans must think, this time we're going to do something, and then they just keep getting relegated again, and it just looks like they're heading straight back down. Yeah. And you were there recently. I think they're a big club with a good support, great stadium, proud history, and they just seem to be such a letdown every time, and it looks like it's going to be a very, very miserable season for them. So they have to do better, and it's not a bright outlook. So I'm going to pick them.
They haven't won yet, and it's funny. I thought when they got Habib Diallo, I thought that'd be a fantastic signing, and it might prove to be. Like, he's scored a lot of goals in the past at Metz and at Strasbourg, and not many teams, certainly in the bottom half, have a proper striker, who can get 15, 20 goals in a season. But so far, his performances have been pretty average, really. Like, certainly in the game against Marseille, barely had a touch of the ball in that. So they need Habib Diallo to start scoring goals. I'm going to be really harsh in my decision, but this is a kid who I've loved through the years, almost teacher pet sort of material for. At least for a couple of years, he was teacher's pet. But I'm sending him into detention now, Warren Zaire-Emery. And this is super harsh because, like I say, he's still a teenager. He's still 19. He's in his 4th season in the PSG first team squad. And he kind of, the reason I thought of it is he kind of has been put into detention by Didier Deschamps and by Gérald Baticle because he's been relegated from the France senior squad to the France under-21s, which is reminiscent of something that happened back in 1998 when Thierry Henry finished joint top scorer at the World Cup and was a World Cup winner and was relegated to the France under-21s. Thierry had a bit of an ego at the time, and I'm sure Warren has an ego as well, and he's going to have to digest that. He played his part in a victory over Estonia with Les Espoirs the other night. But listen, I love this player, but he's lost his way. Whatever the reason is, that there are certainly plenty of sort of theories I can put forward. He had injury problems last year, maybe sort of growing pains having started at the age of 16 as well. His body's still developing and what have you. He's been played out of position at times by Luis Enrique, who's played a lot at right back. And he's got in front of him 3 unbelievable midfielders, like in Vitinha, Fabian Ruiz and João Neves. So when he does come in, he's got to sort of perform at their level. And that is nigh on impossible. But listen, I'm hoping that he will have a positive reaction to this disciplinary measure that I'm inflicting on him, because the future surely is very bright for Warren Zaire-Emery, and maybe he does need to take a bit of a step back. Maybe expectations need to just be calmed down a bit, because, Andy, don't forget, when he was playing at 16, everybody was saying this is future PSG captain.
Yeah.
I had the pleasure of interviewing Johan Cabai, who is in charge of the academy, and he was just gushing about Warren, saying, attitude, qualities. This guy is just, a future great. He may not have said future great, but that's what he was implying. But Andy, it's been tough.
Yeah, and he spoke at a press conference with the under-21s at Clairefontaine last week, and it was quite interesting to read what he was saying, talking about how, first of all, saying he really hoped to be back in the full France squad next month, and I thought, well, that's maybe a bit ambitious, Warren. But interesting to hear him say that he'd been watching videos of himself a couple of seasons ago playing, when he was, making those bursting runs forward with the ball, and realising that he wasn't doing those things anymore, and trying to tell himself that, look, this is what you can do. And also just seeing him say that, now looking back, when I was young, I would do this, but now, with the experience that I've gained, maybe with age, you start to take fewer risks. And it's like, well, actually, I know that is kind of true, that of course the sort of recklessness, the kind of, you don't worry too much about things when you're young, and as you get older, you do start to. But he's only 19. Why is he saying this? He's still very young.
When I was 19, I was taking a lot of risks. I'd say probably more than I was when I was 60.
Exactly, but maybe that shows you that it's the couple of years that he's been around the first team has actually really worn him down, and he has grown a bit too quickly, and he doesn't have that sense, that sort of that young freshness that he had a couple of years ago, and he's really lost something in his game. And the thing about Warren Zaire-Emery is he's not a guy. He's not like the guy who sits in front of the defence and controls the game from deep in midfield. He is not a goal-scoring midfielder. He's really a guy who sort of breaks through the lines, carries the ball, and kind of helps drive the team on in that sense. So without that, there's not much left, and that's that. I mean, he's a brilliant talent, but he does need to get back. He's aware of it. He needs to get back to where he was a couple of years ago. Otherwise, very quickly things could change in a bad way for him.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and I certainly can't believe that he's past it at the age of.
No, I'm not suggesting he's past it.
No, I know you're not, Andy. You've made the point really well, and I think everybody will have. Well, I'd like to think would have compassion with him, because you talk about the intensity. Imagine what. Again, think back to when we were 16, 17. Imagine what he was living through, playing in the Champions League, playing for France, scoring on his France debut, being part of this constant sort of pressure of being a Paris Saint-Germain player, being sort of hyped up as the future star, and doing your school studies. And I'm not using the metaphor, this is literal now, doing his baccalaureate. And I'm sure he was very rarely in detention as well, Warren. So yeah, a lot of sympathy for him. But I'm hoping that my little punishment will spark an upturn. It's been a lot of fun. We're going to be getting stuck back into the action on Monday. Don't forget, Ligue 1 returns on Friday night with a big one. Andy, you're going to be at the Parc des Princes, Paris Saint-Germain against Strasbourg. You can't ask for a better game, really, to get you back up and running.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I think that we've seen a couple of. I know I've said in this podcast previously that kind of suggesting that PSG, the league is theirs to lose and all, but that, of course, you have to say that PSG are so much stronger than the rest of the league. But there have been a few signs recently that they can be got at. We've seen them lose in Marseille, draw in Lille, and this is actually an interesting test of their mettle, especially with the injuries they've had, but also of what Strasbourg can do, because Strasbourg have been really fun. Harder for them away from home, of course, but I think it should be a really good game, worth watching.
Thank you, Andy Scott. Thank you to the listeners. Once more, please rate, review and subscribe on the podcast wherever you find us. And that's it really from me, Matt Spiro. I wish you a great few days. We will be back next Monday. Have a super weekend. Until then, bye-bye.